Late evening draped the New York subway station in a damp hush. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming against the rhythm of distant trains. The platform smelled of wet concrete and metal. Michael Carter stood near the yellow line, his jacket darkened with rain, his daughter Emma clutching his hand. She was small, 5 years old, with curls that stuck to her damp cheeks. Her tiny backpack sagged with crayons and a stuffed rabbit, the ears matted from too many nights pressed against her face. Michael exhaled, long and heavy, the kind of sigh that carried more than fatigue. He had worked 12 hours and still wasn't sure if there was enough left in his wallet for groceries tomorrow. He squeezed Emma's hand gently, a silent reassurance. A sudden movement caught his eye. A tall blonde woman stood several feet away, pressed against the tiled wall. Her designer coat clung to her shoulders, drenched. Dark sunglasses masked her eyes despite the dim light, and her posture was brittle, like she might shatter if someone brushed past too roughly. She rummaged through an empty purse, her hands trembling. Michael noticed the dead phone screen in her palm, the way she glanced at the turnstiles and then back at the tracks with growing panic. She had no ticket, no way out. Emma tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, is she okay?" He crouched slightly, brushing a wet curl from Emma's forehead. His voice was soft. "She's just having a hard night, sweetheart." And then, almost before he could second-guess himself, Michael reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around a single bill, creased, worn, the last $10 he had. For a moment he hesitated. Rent was due soon. Emma needed new shoes. But when he looked back at the woman, her hands had fallen limp at her sides, and something in her silence felt like desperation. He walked over, holding out the bill. "Here," he said quietly. "It's enough for a ticket. Just help someone else someday." The woman stilled, as if the world had gone silent around her. Slowly, she reached out and accepted the money. Her hand brushed his, cold, trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. And then, with fragile deliberation, she removed her sunglasses. Michael froze. Beneath the dripping strands of blonde hair was a face he knew from glossy magazine covers. From the business section of the paper, he sometimes picked up off train seats. Sarah Mitchell. The billionaire. The woman who had built empires with a single signature. Yet here, under the flickering subway lights, she was unrecognizable. Soaked, vulnerable, almost small. Michael blinked, stunned. But Sarah only tightened her grip on the crumpled bill, as if it were more than money. As if it were hope. For a moment, neither of them moved. The subway tunnel breathed its usual metallic groans, but Michael only heard the echo of his own pulse. He stared at the woman, Sarah Mitchell, trying to reconcile the headlines and glossy portraits with the soaked stranger clutching his last $10 bill. She looked away quickly, as if ashamed to be recognized, though her voice betrayed the fragility she couldn't hide. "I don't usually," she began, but her words collapsed into silence. Michael nodded once, sparing her the need to explain. "It's just money," he said softly. "And it's just one night." The train shrieked into the station, a gust of damp air rushing past. Michael guided Emma forward, lifting her carefully into the car. He expected the woman to vanish into the crowd, to disappear like a shadow once she had her ticket. Instead, as the doors slid shut, Sarah lingered near the opposite door, her sunglasses once more in place, though Michael knew now what they concealed. Emma, oblivious, tugged at her father's arm. "Daddy, the lady's sad." Michael hushed her with a faint smile, brushing her curls. But when he risked a glance across the car, Sarah was already looking at them. Not with superiority or the sharp judgment he imagined billionaires carried, but with something quieter. A need. When the train jolted into motion, Michael looked away, convincing himself that she would forget this moment by morning. People like her didn't remember people like him. The next day, rain had given way to a brittle sky, pale light struggling against the steel of the city. In his small workshop tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered bakery, Michael pushed through the morning with the same weary rhythm. Sanding down a wooden frame, checking the worn register drawer, answering the occasional call. Emma sat at a table in the corner, crayons scattered, humming softly to herself. The bell above the door chimed. Michael wiped his hands on a rag, expecting a customer picking up a repair order. Instead, the room shifted. Sarah Mitchell stepped inside. Not the drenched figure from the subway, but a woman composed, polished, every detail calculated. The sleek navy suit, the neat bun, the guarded expression of someone accustomed to boardrooms, not workshops that smelled of cedar dust. Michael froze, the rag still in his hand. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice was steady, professional. "Yes," he said slowly. "I'm here on behalf of the Mitchell Foundation." She paused, letting the words settle. "We're considering contracting local artisans for community projects. Your name was recommended." Michael swallowed. He knew what she was doing. This was business, detached, perhaps even coincidental. Yet when her eyes flicked briefly toward his daughter, something softened. Emma looked up from her crayons, waved cheerfully, and returned to her drawing. Sarah's gaze lingered on Michael a fraction too long, as if some thread of memory tugged at her. But then she cleared her throat, pulling her composure back around her like armor. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of collaboration," she continued. Michael nodded, forcing neutrality. "Of course." He said nothing about the subway, nothing about the $10 bill. He was certain she wouldn't remember, or perhaps she would prefer to pretend it hadn't happened. But when their eyes met again, he saw the flicker, the brief, unguarded recognition. She did remember, and for the first time Michael realized the story wasn't finished. That night, Sarah lay awake in her penthouse overlooking the city. The glass walls revealed the glow of Manhattan, restless and untouchable, yet she felt smaller than ever. On her nightstand, the crumpled $10 bill sat folded neatly, as if she were afraid to throw it away. Her assistant had asked earlier if she wanted receipts filed for the day, if the driver should be on call at dawn. Sarah had nodded absently, but her mind wasn't on meetings or the endless grind of acquisitions. It kept circling back to the subway, to the way that stranger's hand had brushed hers, to the quiet steadiness in his eyes. Michael Carter. By morning, curiosity overcame restraint. She ordered a discreet inquiry. Not a full investigation, just enough to answer the gnawing question of who he was. The file arrived days later. She opened it with hesitation, as if bracing for disappointment. Michael Carter, 34, widower, once a student of architecture at City College. Left after his wife's diagnosis. Worked warehouse jobs, handyman shifts, odd carpentry contracts. No debts beyond the ordinary. No scandals. Nothing but a man who had given up almost everything for a child. Emma Carter, 5 years old. Kindergarten notes. Quiet, kind, a little behind in reading but ahead in drawing. Sarah pressed her palm to the folder, feeling its weight. She had grown used to background checks that revealed motives, manipulations, hidden ambitions. But here was only struggle and resilience. When she read that his supervisor at the distribution center had recently filed a complaint recommending termination, insubordination, failure to meet quotas, something in her chest tightened. She knew the pattern. A manager cleaning house, cutting costs, discarding people like broken tools. She didn't think. She acted. By noon, the supervisor's complaint was quietly withdrawn. A call from upper management made sure of it. No one would ever tell Michael why his job had suddenly stabilized, why his schedule was adjusted to allow for Emma's school hours. He would simply continue on unaware. Sarah closed the file, set it aside, and leaned back in her chair. Her reflection in the glass window stared back, controlled, untouchable, the face the world knew. Yet for the first time in years, she had done something not for profit, not for power, but for one man who had once given her his last $10. And she didn't even know why. The days slipped forward. Michael noticed nothing unusual, only that his supervisor seemed less inclined to hover, less eager to mark every slip of protocol. He chalked it up to luck, or maybe grace, the kind his late wife had always whispered about when life bent but didn't break. In the evenings, after Emma fell asleep, Michael worked in his small workshop, sanding wood until the edges were soft enough for her hands. Sometimes he wondered if he'd imagined that night on the subway, if Sarah Mitchell had really stood there like a lost stranger. Then one afternoon, as he packed tools into their worn places, the bell above the shop door chimed. Sarah entered again. This time without assistance, without folders. Just her. She glanced around at the modest shelves, the smell of pine and varnish heavy in the air. Emma was at the back table again, crayons scattered, a butterfly half-colored on the page. "Hello," Sarah said, her voice quieter than before. Michael nodded. "Back for another contract?" She gave a faint smile. "Not today." Emma looked up, beamed, and waved. Sarah waved back, awkwardly but sincerely. Something in Michael softened, but he kept his guard. He knew the weight of people with power. They gave and they could take. Still, when Sarah stepped closer, brushing her fingers along a polished wooden frame, her voice carried something he didn't expect: uncertainty. "You fixed more than furniture that night," she said quietly, almost to herself. Michael blinked. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he believed it. But for the first time, he saw her not as the woman from headlines, not as the billionaire who could change the world with a signature. He saw her as the woman on the subway platform, wet, shivering, clutching a stranger's kindness like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And he realized, maybe she hadn't forgotten after all. The weeks that followed blurred into an unexpected rhythm. Sarah appeared at the workshop more often than Michael thought possible for someone whose name filled the business pages. Sometimes she came with her assistant, brisk and polished, speaking of contracts and donations. Other times, she arrived alone, almost shyly, like a woman searching for something she couldn't quite name. Michael didn't ask why. He didn't dare. For every conversation about wood and measurements, there were smaller ones, threads of ordinary life woven into the silence. Emma showing her a crayon drawing. Sarah listening with more attention than Michael had ever seen from anyone in a suit. But it unsettled him. One evening, after Sarah left, Michael overheard two men at the corner diner. They were talking in low voices, but her name carried weight. "Mitchell," one of them said, "worth billions, owns half the skyline." Michael froze with his coffee in hand. He had known, of course, known in the way everyone knew who Sarah Mitchell was. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing the sheer scale of her world, struck him like a blow. He thought back to the subway platform, to the soaked stranger clutching his last $10. And shame burned in him. Shame at how easily he had believed she was someone like him. Ordinary. Human. That night he could hardly sleep. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the workshop again. She looked composed, as always, though her sunglasses lingered on her face despite the weak winter sun outside. Michael watched her closely, suspicion pressing against his chest. "You never told me," he said finally, his tone sharper than he intended. Sarah paused, hand resting lightly on the frame of a chair he had been repairing. "Told you what?" "Who you are." She stilled. For the first time, the armor of her poise cracked. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. She removed her sunglasses slowly, setting them on the counter. "Because I was afraid," she admitted. Her voice was not the voice of a billionaire, not the voice of a woman commanding boardrooms. It was low, trembling. "Afraid that if you knew, you'd treat me differently, like everyone else does." Michael's jaw tightened. "And what? You wanted me to think you were what? Some stranger in the rain who needed help." "I was," she whispered. "That night I needed help more than I've ever admitted to anyone." Emma, sensing the tension, looked up from her crayons. Her wide eyes flicked between them. Michael softened his tone. "For her sake." "You should have told me," he said quietly. Sarah lowered her gaze, her hands clasping tightly in front of her as though bracing against a storm. "I've spent my whole life hiding pieces of myself. Power, money, they don't protect you. They just make you invisible in a different way." Michael wanted to resist the pull of her words, but something in them rang true. He had lived invisibility in another form. Shifts no one thanked him for, sacrifices no one saw. Maybe her mask wasn't as far from his as he thought. Still, the air between them was fragile, stretched thin by truth. Sarah reached for her sunglasses again, then hesitated. Her eyes shimmered faintly, and Michael saw for the first time that they weren't simply covered out of vanity. "There's another reason," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wear them because sometimes I can't see clearly without them. I have a condition. My eyes," she faltered, swallowing hard. "It's degenerative. I've hidden it from the public for years. If they knew, if investors knew." Her words broke off. Michael stared at her, the weight of her confession sinking in. He expected to feel anger still, betrayal. But instead, what settled in him was something quieter. Compassion. Emma slipped off her chair and toddled closer, holding out a butterfly she had just drawn. "Here," she said simply, placing it in Sarah's hand. Sarah blinked, staring down at the uneven crayon wings. For a moment, her carefully constructed world cracked open, and Michael saw not the CEO, not the billionaire, but a woman who looked as though she hadn't been handed something simple and kind in years. She knelt, her suit creasing against the sawdust floor, and pulled Emma gently into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Michael turned away, his throat tight. In that quiet workshop, with sawdust floating in the air and the sound of Emma's laughter filling the space, distrust gave way, if only slightly, to understanding. And for the first time, Michael realized that Sarah's secret was not her wealth. It was her humanity. The following days unfolded with an unexpected quietness. Sarah came often, sometimes with a reason, sometimes without one. She would bring a folder, lay it on Michael's workbench, and then linger long after the business talk ended, as though the sawdust and smell of pine offered her a refuge from the glass towers of her empire. Michael, cautious at first, began to allow her presence. He noticed how her eyes softened when Emma showed her drawings, how she crouched awkwardly in her expensive suit just to see the world from a child's height. He caught her brushing her fingers along the grain of the wood, almost tenderly, as if she wanted to memorize its imperfections. One evening, when the shop was empty except for them, Sarah leaned against the counter, her sunglasses resting beside her. The light above caught faint scars in her eyes, a dullness that betrayed what she had confessed. "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "how strange it must have been for you that night, to hand a stranger your last $10. Michael set aside the piece of oak he was sanding, his hands resting on the bench. "It wasn't strange. It was human. I just thought you needed it more than I did." Sarah gave a faint smile, but her gaze didn't leave his face. "And yet I can't stop thinking how much that moment changed me. You gave something without knowing who I was, without wanting anything back. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. Praise sat awkwardly on his shoulders. "I wasn't trying to change anyone. I was just trying to be decent in a world that isn't most of the time." The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the old ceiling fan. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice lower. "Do you ever feel like kindness costs too much?" Michael looked down at his hands, calloused and rough. "Every day. But I do it anyway. Because if Emma grows up thinking the world is only cold and sharp, then I've failed her." Sarah's lips parted slightly, as if the words struck deeper than she expected. She studied him for a long moment, then asked softly, "What about you? Who failed you?" Michael froze. He rarely spoke of his wife, of the life he had lost. But something in Sarah's tone, genuine, fragile, pulled the words from him. "She did everything right," he said at last, his voice low. "Doctors missed it. By the time they found it, the cancer had already spread. We had 1 year. 1 year of hospitals, bills, pretending to Emma that everything was normal. I held her hand the night she slipped away. And then I promised Emma I'd do whatever it took to keep her safe, even if it meant giving up everything else." The confession left his throat raw. He didn't look up, not wanting pity. But Sarah didn't offer pity. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry." And there was weight in those 2 words, weight that told him she understood something about loss too. She turned her face slightly, the city lights outside reflecting against the window. Do you know why I hide behind these glasses? Michael glanced at them on the counter. Because of your eyes? She nodded. Partly, but also because they make me untouchable. Strong. People see sunglasses and assume control, distance. They don't see weakness. They don't see fear. Michael studied her in the dim light. And you don't want them to. Her voice cracked. I can't. My world runs on the illusion that I am invincible. If they knew the truth, that some nights I can't even read the reports in front of me without strain, that I wake up terrified of what I might lose tomorrow, my empire would unravel. My power would vanish. And then, she trailed off, pressing her fingers against her temple. Michael felt an ache he hadn't expected. In that moment, she wasn't the billionaire CEO. She was just a woman trying not to fall apart. Emma's laughter drifted from the back room, breaking the heaviness. Sarah turned toward the sound, her expression softening, her composure slipping into something almost maternal. She's light, Sarah whispered. Like everything you've carried hasn't dimmed her. Michael's throat tightened. I try to shield her from the weight. That's all I can do. Sarah reached for her sunglasses, hesitated, then left them on the counter. Instead, she placed her hand gently on the edge of the workbench, close enough to his that he could feel the warmth radiating. Not touching, not crossing the boundary, but near. Michael, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what this is between us, but I know I don't want to lose it. For the first time in years, I feel like someone sees me. Not the empire, not the headlines. Me. Michael didn't respond right away. He only looked at her. This woman who had been both stranger and revelation, both untouchable and vulnerable. And in that silence, something unspoken grew between them. Not a promise. Not yet, but the beginning of one. The city had a way of talking. Whispers carried faster than headlines, drifting through diners, barbershops, and subway cars until they became truth. Michael never paid much attention to gossip. He didn't have the time. But one evening, while waiting at the corner store, he couldn't help overhearing two men in line behind him. Sarah Mitchell's foundation just bought another block in Midtown, one said, his tone half admiration, half resentment. She's got more power than the mayor, and she'll do anything to keep it. Anything, the other echoed. Remember that journalist 2 years ago? Wrote about her health, hinted she wasn't as strong as she looked. Suddenly the article vanished. So did he. They laughed darkly. Michael froze, his hand tightening around the carton of milk. He knew rumors twisted truth, but the words dug under his skin like splinters. Vanished. Hidden. Control. That night, as Emma slept curled against her rabbit, Michael sat at the kitchen table staring at the flickering bulb overhead. He thought of Sarah's sunglasses, her silences, the way she had stepped so effortlessly into his life. Too effortlessly. By the time he saw her again, the unease had hardened into something heavier. She arrived at the workshop in her usual quiet grace, a navy coat draped around her shoulders. Emma ran to greet her with a crayon drawing, chattering about butterflies. Sarah crouched, smiling faintly, but when she looked up at Michael, she found his eyes colder than before. Something's wrong, she said softly. Michael set down his tools. I just keep thinking. Who exactly are you when you're not here? When you're not pretending to be this? He gestured vaguely at her, at the softened version of Sarah he had come to know. What do you hide behind those headlines? Her smile faltered. Michael, I heard people talking, he cut in, about you, about the way you silence stories, about how you control everything. Even me, maybe. Was that you at my job? Making sure I wasn't fired. She hesitated. The pause was answer enough. Michael's chest tightened. So you did. I was trying to protect you, she said quickly, her voice breaking through its usual calm. I couldn't stand by and watch someone punish you for nothing. I only made one call that changed my life without me knowing. Michael snapped. That's what power is for you, isn't it? You make decisions for people and they don't even get to choose. Not even me. The room fell silent except for the hum of the fan. Emma, sensing the tension, retreated quietly to her corner, hugging her rabbit. Sarah's shoulders dropped. Her voice was barely a whisper. I was afraid. Afraid of what? That if you knew who I was, you'd walk away, she said, eyes glistening. That you'd look at me the way everyone else does, like I'm untouchable. So I hid. I thought if I kept that part of me locked away, I could be just a woman to you, not a headline, not a fortress. Michael's anger wavered, but the wound remained. You lied to me, Sarah. Do you understand? After everything I've lost, honesty is the only thing I have left. And you couldn't even give me that. Tears gathered at the edge of her lashes. She stepped closer, desperate. I never lied about what mattered. The night on the subway, that was real. The way I look at Emma, the way I look at you, real. But I've lived so long in a world where truth is weaponized. I didn't know how to trust you with mine. Michael turned away, his jaw tight. She reached for her sunglasses on the counter, hesitated, and instead placed them down. Look at me, she whispered. He did, and for the first time he saw the rawness she usually concealed. The faint clouding of her eyes, the fear behind them. Not a weapon, not a fortress, just a woman who was tired of hiding. I'm losing my sight, Michael, she confessed, the words tumbling out. Every year a little more. I've built empires by seeing things others couldn't, by staying 3 steps ahead. But soon, I won't be able to, and if they find out, it's over. Everything I've built, everything I've fought for, gone. So I hide. I've hidden for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be seen. Michael's breath caught. Sarah's voice cracked as she stepped closer. But you saw me that night. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a woman lost on a platform. And that terrifies me, because I don't know what you'll do with that truth now. Silence hung between them, heavy as stone. Michael closed his eyes, his anger fading into something more complicated. Sorrow, compassion, confusion. He wanted to protect himself, to keep her at arm's length. But he couldn't unhear the tremor in her voice, couldn't unsee the fragility in her eyes. At last he spoke low and rough. You should have trusted me. Sarah's tears slipped free. I'm trying. Emma padded softly across the floor then, her drawing in hand. She held it up between them. A butterfly, uneven and bright, wings stretching toward the edges of the page. Don't be sad, she whispered. Both adults looked at her, the fragile truce between them held together by a child's crayon wings. Michael exhaled slowly, his hand brushing across his daughter's curls. Sarah bent down, kissed the paper softly, and handed it back. For now, words failed them. But in the quiet of that workshop, something shifted. Not resolution, not forgiveness, but the beginning of truth laid bare. Painful, unsteady, and necessary. The silence after their confrontation lingered for days. Sarah didn't come to the workshop, and Michael didn't expect her to. He told himself it was better this way, that their worlds were too different, too fragile when pressed together. But each evening, after Emma had gone to bed, he caught himself staring at the empty chair in the shop, the one Sarah always leaned against. He didn't miss the billionaire. He missed the woman who had once stood dripping wet on a subway platform, clutching a crumpled bill like it was salvation. On the 4th day, the bell above the workshop door chimed. Michael looked up from his tools, heart caught in his throat. It was her. No suit this time, no polished armor. Just Sarah in a simple gray sweater, her hair tied loosely, her sunglasses absent. Her eyes looked tired but unguarded, like storm clouds breaking open. I wasn't sure if you'd let me in, she said quietly. Michael set down his hammer. You didn't knock. A faint smile tugged at her lips. I wasn't sure I still could. For a moment, neither moved. Then Emma burst from the back room, crayons in hand. Sarah, she squealed, running forward. Sarah dropped to her knees, arms instinctively open. Emma collided with her, wrapping her arms tight. Sarah's eyes closed, her face pressing into the child's curls, as though that simple embrace steadied her more than anything else could. When she looked up at Michael again, there were tears, unashamed this time. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I've lived so long behind walls, behind glass. I don't know how to stand in a room without hiding half of myself." Michael wiped his palms on his work rag. "Maybe you don't need to know. Maybe you just show up. Like now." Sarah rose slowly, her hand brushing against the counter. She glanced around the shop, at the wood shavings on the floor, the unfinished chair, the scattered crayons. It was messy, unpolished, human, and she wanted to belong in it. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly, softly. Michael stiffened. Few asked. Fewer listened. But Sarah's voice carried no pity, only quiet respect. "She was light," he began, the words rough at first. "She loved sunflowers, even though she was allergic to pollen. She'd sing to Emma before bed, even when her voice was so weak she could barely speak. She fought until the very last day, not for herself but for us. And when she was gone, I had to learn to hold everything together with just these two hands." Sarah's throat tightened. "And you did." "I tried," Michael said. "Still trying." The room grew still. Then Sarah's hand shifted, fingers brushing lightly over the edge of the workbench until they almost touched his. She didn't take his hand, not yet, but she didn't pull away either. "I've spent years pretending I'm strong," she whispered. "But the truth is, I'm terrified of what's coming. My sight is slipping, and no amount of money can stop it. I thought if I kept it hidden, I could keep the illusion alive. But with you, I don't want illusions. I want to be seen, even if it's messy, even if it's ugly." Michael's gaze lingered on her, on the faint clouding of her eyes, on the tremor in her voice, and something inside him eased. "You're not ugly," he said simply. "You're human. That's enough." Her lips parted, as if those words carried more weight than any compliment she'd ever received at a gala or a boardroom. Emma clambered up onto the workbench then, holding out another drawing. This one was of 3 figures: a tall man, a woman with yellow hair, and a little girl between them. They were all holding hands under a crooked sun. Michael swallowed. Sarah touched the paper gently, her fingers trembling. "Is this us?" she asked Emma softly. Emma nodded proudly. "It's our family." The word hung in the air like a fragile thread. Michael met Sarah's eyes, and for the first time, neither looked away. The workshop was quiet except for the faint hum of the city beyond its walls. And in that silence, without promises, without declarations, they both understood something. They were no longer strangers bound by chance. They were 2 broken lives daring, just barely, to lean toward each other. Not healed, not whole, but no longer alone.